In the 1988 cult classic They Live, directed by John Carpenter, we see a blend of science fiction and social commentary where a small group of extraterrestrial ruling elite are disguised as humans in plain sight and who use the media as a tool of mind control. The narrative follows a nomadic protagonist who stumbles upon a revolutionary pair of sunglasses, revealing a sinister plot to use the media to relay subliminal messages to the public to conform, consume, and obey. The extraterrestrial beings stand as a chilling metaphor for the upper echelons of power, orchestrating a grand masquerade of deception where they are the puppeteers of capitalism, leveraging mass media to anesthetize the public consciousness, transforming citizens into docile consumers and passive components in the machinery of economic gain. The film has been widely celebrated for its subversive messages of anti-capitalism, suggesting a conspiracy where the mass media is wielded as an instrument of mass sedation for societal control, used by the ruling elite to manipulate public perception and maintain power. We have arrived at a point where members of the press continue to try to shove their sanitized, royal family approved narrative down our throats, suggesting that we are just crazy conspiracy theorists. Meanwhile, they pick and choose what version of KP's silliness they want to present to the public. So most journalists are forced to acknowledge as a kind of cynical, unforced error the now infamous Photogate, where William was more than happy to cast the blame on his missing wife. But remember this Kate? Or this one? Yeah, what happened to them? Notice how they just conveniently ignore that these things ever happened. I guess we're now supposed to just pretend that these things didn't happen too, right? Folks, this is the kind of hypocrisy in the mainstream media that I find abhorrent. It's like they're saying, don't believe your lying eyes, just listen to us. We're just a bunch of crazy coots out here making up a stink about a woman who hasn't credibly been seen since Christmas. And the fact that we refuse to accept the palace's constantly shifting narrative or the respectable journalists' sanitized version of events means that we're just oddballs or misfits or outliers. And I embrace being among this minority. And to all these quote unquote respectable journalists out there, and anyone else for that matter, uncomfortable with bucking the status quo, I say, if you want to fillet the royal family all the way back to the Middle Ages, don't expect us all to follow sheepishly along with blind obedience. So in my last video, I mentioned that I came across an article written by a journalist in the Sunday Times that stated that William and Kate decided that in the interest of providing normalcy for their children, they thought it was best to let go of the cook, the housekeeper, and the nanny. And folks, this is just another example of the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil that these respectable journalists engage in. So no one thinks it's bizarre that at a time when Kate would need the help more than ever, she would choose instead to let go of all her essential staff and take on all these responsibilities herself. Yeah. So we're supposed to believe that Kate's at home doing all the cooking and the cleaning and taking care of the kids. Sure. But we are the crazy ones, see? And supposedly it's because they want normalcy for their kids. Okay, but why did it take Kate having abdominal surgery and cancer for her and William to decide they wanted normalcy for their kids? How come they didn't want normalcy for the kids prior to Kate having abdominal surgery and cancer? And folks, I'm not making this stuff up. If you've been following my videos, you should know by now that all of my analyses are based on things put out either by the press or from the royal family itself, which is in fact one and the same. For example, a lot of people have asked me to comment about Thomas Kingston. But here's the thing. I simply don't have enough solid information right now to formulate any kind of theory about what he may have known vis-a-vis Kate's disappearance. And I just don't want to make stuff up. All I know is what was reported and what I observed. And that is that he committed suicide by a self-inflicted gunshot. And that a couple days later, William pulled out of a memorial for his late godfather, which he clumsily claimed later that it was because that's when he found out about Kate's diagnosis. Okay. And he was later on seen with bruises on his neck. That's it. That's all I know. Does that seem suspicious? You bet it does. But for now, that's all I know. And unless some whistleblower comes forward with more information, then this is pretty much all we have. So over the weekend, George was seen for the first time since Christmas at the Aston Villa match with his father. And folks, let me just say that I am so happy to see that the kids are all right. For months now, there has been speculation about the kids. They haven't been seen since Christmas. There's no real evidence that they've been to school. So I am relieved to see that he's okay. And folks, I thought I was the only one to pick up on this, but it was not lost on observers that there was a distinct change in his demeanor. Compared with these images of George in public last year, this child looks more despondent, almost disconnected, like his mind is somewhere else, and he doesn't really seem to be enjoying being there at all. It all looks kind of coerced. I'm not sure who the other kid is, but they both don't really look very thrilled to be there at all. And William seems really intent on controlling his reactions. At one point, he leans in to say something to George, and George appears to recoil. Looks like he's being told to clap and look happy. And I'm really convinced that William probably dragged him out here just to quiet the whispers and to provide cover for himself. So I came across this article a couple of days ago that states that Royal Insider denies Palace applied pressure to protect the king from criminal prosecution. And just bear in mind that the king doesn't only mean Charles, but the future monarch as well. And this happened last June. So even though this report was from a few days ago, it's actually an old story. So it's a little odd that it's being brought up now, especially in light of the mystery surrounding Kate. And it's basically a rural law passed by the Welsh government that seems rather benign enough, relating to the marketing of agricultural products, the disposal of carcasses. But what makes it newsworthy is that the report states that the royal family household rang the Welsh government to ensure that the monarch could not be prosecuted under this act, And that would also include the police being barred from entering their residences without the king's permission to investigate possible crimes. And folks, this isn't necessarily controversial. This immunity isn't new. It dates back to a long-established relic from the 1700s, which grants immunity to the monarch from prosecution. And so after receiving assurances that they, and by they meaning the monarch, would be exempt from any prosecution should they have been found to have violated the law, Charles approved the bill in June of last year. So this is just another case highlighting the royal family's long-standing do as I say, not as I do privilege. And while this isn't necessarily controversial, the takeaway is that the king, be it the present or future king, is immune from prosecution. If it is found that he engaged in a criminal activity, he basically gets away with it. And I guess as a Yank, this just reeks to high heaven to me. That they can get away with crimes, lie constantly, all while presenting themselves to the world as these exemplary models of virtue. And now one of their key players is missing. And folks, this just highlights the dismal state of the press today. Not just over there, but here in America too. The press, whose job it is to dig until they get to the bottom of a story, until they find the truth. The press, whose real role in any democracy is to act as a fourth column, guarding the people against tyranny from those in power. The press instead just rubber stamps whatever the monarchy says, putting out a bunch of sanitized, sugar-coated puff pieces, demanding blind obedience, and essentially aiding and abetting in the royal family's ongoing gaslighting of the public. And folks, some people have asked me, why do you care? Kate's a princess and she's got nothing to worry about. Her life is set. And folks, don't you understand that that's the whole point? If this can happen to a princess, what do you think can happen to you? And at this point, I think Britain is at a juncture where they will either have to move forward into the future where everyone has equal rights and protections, or remain on the sinking ship of a dying archaic institution that favors the wealthy and the powerful, exempting them from prosecution of crimes that ordinary people would face, that grants special rights and privileges onto those deemed as special, while everyone else shivers in their poorly heated flats and struggles to afford the basic necessities to get by. Which is why Kate's disappearance is part of a symptom of a larger problem. One in which the press no longer acts as a bulwark against the tyranny of the ruling elite, but rather a PR machine for the wealthy and the powerful. No longer challenging, but demanding unquestioning fealty and blind allegiance, all while cloaking a hideous truth behind their obsequious articles and demands of complete submission. In other words, just obey and pretend that what you actually saw never really happened. Simply comply and society will embrace you. And folks, that's what makes this so grotesque to me. The fact that many of them know the truth, but instead of doing their jobs as journalists, they choose to willingly participate in weaving a web of deceit, betraying their profession and their duty to the public. Fearful of losing their jobs and not being able to pay their rents and their mortgages, they instead castigate those of us who question the corrupt and the absurd. Then there was this report yesterday from The Times with the headline, Prince William Makes Big Sacrifice for Kate Middleton. And the subheading reads, Prince William gives up all his dreams for his wife, Kate Middleton. And folks, this is a perfect example of today's theme of media manipulation. Does this sound like objective reporting to you? I mean, this headline sounds more like a blurb from a Danielle Steel novel rather than a news report. Anyway, the article goes on to mention that William has decided to skip the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa later this year in October, citing Kate's ongoing treatment for cancer. And folks, this is precisely the kind of article meant for the people who are just not paying attention. First of all, didn't Deepfake Kate say that the chemo was preventative? So how do they know she'll still need preventative chemotherapy, preventative being the operative word here, all the way down in October? Nothing makes sense. But nonetheless, we are expected to just nod and comply. And finally, there's this report about William opting for a work from home lifestyle. And folks, this just seems like he's either being given a timeout for his bizarre and embarrassing behavior, or this is a forced self-exile to escape the public murmurs. And instead of making his obligatory public appearances, he chooses instead to increasingly cocoon himself in an attempt to shield himself from scrutiny. Because as each passing day goes by, with Kate failing to materialize in any way other than digital form, as each report from the sycophantic press is forced to admit further and further delay for her reappearance, even the most avid royalists are now forced to admit that something is wrong. And should William ever ascend the throne, he will forever be plagued by rumors and suspicions about his wife's disappearance. And whatever ending to this story he chooses to write about Kate's absence, it will forever cast a long shadow over his rule. So drop a line in the comments. Let me know what you think. And I will be sure to consider your opinions in my next video. And be sure to hit the like and subscribe. And I will continue to stay on top of the story.